Islam Morris, Islam fam. Pray everything is all right with y'all out there. You already know what time it is. Be back for another session. Number 6. Let's get right into it. All right. The Black Child Intellectual Development as revealed by standardized tests. There exists a sizable number of tests designed to measure the so-called intelligence of children and adults. One of the best known and utilized tests is the Stanford Bind test, which yields a single mental age, or MA, score, from which an intelligence quotient, IQ, can be derived. The 3 most popular infant intelligence tests are the Giselle developmental schedules, the Cattell infant intelligence scale, and the Bailey scales. Other childhood tests which are often utilized are the Merrill-Palmer, and the Wechsler intelligence scales for children, or the WISC. The scope of our study does not allow for a fuller explanation and review of these and other tests used to measure the intellectual development of children. We therefore refer the interested reader to the suitable book about psychological testing. Mental age, a concept developed by Binet, is attained by comparing the individuals, in terms of our interest here, the child's test performance with the average performance of a larger number of other individuals, children. The essential procedure for constructing a standardized intelligence test of scales involves giving the proposed test to a large population of children and or adults and finding the ages at which a determined majority of these individuals have passed each item included in the test and arranging these items in order of difficulty. To calculate the MA of a particular child, he is tested and his results are compared to the average test performance of other children his age. For example, if the child passes the test items by the average 7-year-old, but not those passed by 8-year-olds, his MA would be 7. If his chronological age, or CA, is also 7, then he may be said to be of average intelligence. If his CA is 6, it may be said that he is above average intelligence. If his CA happens to be 10, it may be said that he is below average intelligence. The German psychologist Wilhelm Sturm developed the concept of IQ, which can be computed directly by using the formula 100 MA divided by CA gets your IQ. So that's 100 and then the mental age divided by CA, which is chronological age. And that's how you get to IQ. Intriguing formula there. It has been found that the IQ is relatively constant for each individual. All of the things are held constant. This should not be taken to mean that IQ is an absolute, intrinsic, immutable quality of the individual and not subject to influence by a number of other factors and circumstances. As we shall see later in this chapter, IQ is more of a measure of cognitive style as related to social class, motivational state, and cultural background. Right? Than it is to any innate biological capacity. Islam, Dr. Kia. Peace and love. Good to see you in here. I appreciate it. Here we go. So, however, preschool and school-age intelligence tests can be said with a fair degree of accuracy to predict later intelligence test performance, duration of time between the tests being of prime importance. So by age 6, the predictive value of tests is significantly reliable, though even at this point, the predictions have to be made within large ranges due to considerable individual variations. The measured IQ of children does give a fairly good indication of the child's academic possibilities. Of course, with factors of environment, help, and things like that. Yeah, just trying to spread the work as much as I can in a more relatable way, in a more active way. Even though this book by Amos Wilson is it's like from the 70s, so some of the concepts need to be reevaluated, and that's kind of what I'm doing in this series. But overall, the issues kind of remain the same, so the principles still apply here. And also, it's an intriguing read as well. Up to this point, we have written of intelligence as if a universally accepted definition of this concept existed. This is by no means the case. Guilford, a highly regarded psychometrist, spoke to the issue of definition. After tests had been invented to measure intelligence, quite a number of thinkers felt the urge to define it. Symposia were held on the problem, and numerous voices were heard. The outcomes were far from agreement. As Spearman in 1927 put it, intelligence became a mere vocal sound, a word with so many meanings that it finally had none. He further quoted J.S. Mill in a statement that described the situation well and this should serve as a warning. The tendency has always been strong to believe that whatever receives a name must be an entity of being, having an independent existence of its own. And if no real entity answering to the name could be found, men did not, for the reason, suppose that none existed, but imagined that it was something peculiarly abstruse and mysterious. Despite E.G. Boring's somewhat facetious definition of intelligence as a measurable capacity, that must start to be defined as capacity to do well in an intelligence test. There are serious questions as to what the IQ test and what is the structure of intelligence. And this kind of goes to the paradigm of the general, board of education or the regular school structure. You kind of do a disservice in the realm of education when you're just sticking straight to these standardized or robotic type observations, in which they call tests, or monitoring to see the trajectory of how you're going to perform from grade school pretty much to however far you take it. But usually those tests start about third grade. So they get you early to be, kind of robotic in your thinking, and kind of be a one-track minded. And then also apply emotions to these standardized tests, these scantrons and pamphlets and things like that. Make you feel a certain way if you don't kind of measure up to what your other classmates or even other people from other schools might measure up to be. And this is kind of what he's going into with the with the IQ and things like that. Everything can't be measured and be effective as a a natural being, as opposed to observation, and the good old trial and error, gaining that experience, from knowledge, wisdom to understanding. All right, where were we? All right, so Thurstone, as a composite of simpler processes combining complex ways to deal with the problems confronting the individual, Guilford posited a model for the structure of intelligence that consists of some 120 factors. From just these few examples, one can surmise that psychologists are far from agreement as to what intelligence really is, and what is it that intelligence tests are therefore really measuring. The reader should keep this in mind when discussing intelligence, or uses the terms characterize some individual group. It seems that the prime concern of psychologists in this area, i.e., dealing with the problem of finding a universally and scientifically acceptable definition of intelligence, has been misplaced towards the dubious area of trying to establish individual and ethnic group intellectual superiority or inferiority. Such exercises are patiently ridiculous in light of the fact that the standard of comparison is undefined. We shall examine briefly why psychologists have moved in this direction at the end of this chapter. And what's also funny is the fact that these concepts at this time and pretty much now wouldn't really define. It's just more of a social acceptance. Start with a small group and their peers, and if it's socially accepted to deem intelligence to be this, then they'll just continue that cycle of what that means, which is this, and just continue to trickle down. And then if you have influence in society, then groupthink, everyone is pretty much using these terms to define themselves, as opposed to, doing the introspection to figure out what intelligence is to you. Because what is it? I believe it was Einstein that said something to the effect of, if you were judging a fish by its ability to climb a tree, then everybody would be a genius or something like that. Oh man. But here we go. In the lay mind and in the minds of the unknown professionals, such as school administrators and bias psychologists, the IQ tests have been greatly overrated. As Joanna Ryan stated, it is important to clarify the meaning of IQ scores before considering the differences that are found between groups of people. IQ scores are very complex in the sense that many assumptions and operation are involved in the calculation, and it's only when the complexities are fully understood that it's legitimate to try to explain the origin of differences in score between people. The fact that most IQ tests are standardized and involve the use of a large amount of statistical mathematical formula and work that the IQ score as a number leaves the impression on both lay and professional persons that these tests are objective. In other words, psychological sleight of hand, such as scientific methods of test construction and standardization and the representation of an individual's performance by some neutral number, creates in the mind of the uninitiated an illusion of objectivity. The objectivity of intelligence tests is largely mythological. Ginsburg listed 4 myths concerning the IQ test. The first myth is that the IQ test measures an intelligence which is a unitary mental ability. There's not one intelligence, but many, and because of this, it is not clear what the IQ score reflects. One reason states like Tennessee rejecting U.S. government funding is because they don't agree with standardized tests. How do you put this? There's a I'm not sure. But yeah, Dr. K, that's a great point. Because it's really difficult to measure just really off of, memorization. Because you don't have to be passionate about standardized tests. And some people aren't good test takers, just suffer from a bunch of anxiety when they get these, because they're so attached to the outcome, because it's kind of forced and, beat down on you. You don't pass this test and you're not this, you're not that. So shout out to Tennessee for that. Now they knew, I think I saw a statistic recently for Tennessee for, so-called black children as far as their reading levels. And it was like that, it was in the 80s, 80% of the children couldn't read. which is definitely an unfortunate situation. But one step at a time. It's good that they rejected the funding. And that's another thing. Like, there's no separation between school and state. I don't get what people don't understand about that. If the school is being funded by the government, you think the school is going to be able to utilize a creative paradigm that goes against what the government is funding for? I don't think so. They'll pull that funding quick. So we got to start looking into that more as people. Say, hey, like, what is my children really learning in these institutions? Like, even like your grandchildren said that their energy is by far more better learning for a more natural environment. They start you off preschool, kindergarten, nothing but colors, every color you can see in the spectrum. Very bright. In first grade, white walls, beige lighting, or just different type of uh, lighting that pretty much shuts you down and don't make you want to learn. The same lighting that's in the interrogation rooms, police precincts. It's the same lighting that they put in these classrooms. I mean, it's just my opinion from my observation of schooling. I don't have any definitive proof that that's exactly the case, but that's definitely what it seems like. Cold in the clothes, the cold in the classrooms, and if you go to court, cold in there too. So that's the system at work to develop that elementary to prison pipeline, pretty much. Right. Yeah, and it's strategic. So, like, I mean, it's not that they're just mistakenly doing these things. It's definitely a strategic design to make to basically create workers. I believe the philosophy of the General Board of Education was talking about how I didn't want thinkers and they wanted workers instead. All right, the fact that most IQ tests are standardized and involve the use of a large amount of. Okay, I read that part. All right, there we go. So the first myth is that the IQ test and intelligence, which is a unitary mental ability, there is not one intelligence, but many. And because of this, it's not clear what the IQ score reflects. The second myth is that the differences in IQ scores reflect fundamental difference in intellect. The usual assumption is that the differences in IQ reflect those abilities which are at the heart of the intellectual life. In addition, it is assumed that what the test fails to measure is not very important. Again, the proposition is in error. The third myth is that the IQ test measures intellectual competence. The common view is that an individual's IQ reflects the best he can do in the intellectual sphere. The IQ represents the upper limit on his mental capabilities. While this may be true for some people, it is not for all. In the case of poor children, especially, the IQ test may not measure intellectual competence and may not give a true picture of what poor children are capable of. And that's kind of why these tests exist, because it's easy to create groups and labels over these type of games that they're pretty much playing. That's all these people do is play games throughout society and make us think that is real. Because I mean, if you're born poor, okay, that's not your fault. But dying poor, or well, before you transcend, you're still, you're poor. Um, that's kind of your fault because we have the ability to overcome our current circumstances if they're not circumstances that we desire. So with that ability, we hold the key to transformation. So you're never down to the point to where you can't get back up ever in life. That's why it's best to get your experience, stay down till you get up, and then when you get back up, still stay down, but not necessarily physically, but spiritually, mentally. Appreciate every obstacle that you have to overcome, the adversity that you have to face, because once you overcome it, it's like a callus that you're building up on your mind or your heart, just anywhere. As if someone is constantly, you know, in the gym, lifting, maybe deadlifting, something where they're pulling pretty much and having to grip the bar and end up getting the calluses, but they're constantly doing that over and over. But the more consistently they do it, the less the calluses will affect them, and then there's be a benefit for them, stronger grip, stronger hands, and things like that. Same goes to us as far as obstacles, you name it. It builds character, which then attracts more abundance to us, and we'd be able to thrive instead of surviving. All right, but stop rambling on. There we go. The fourth myth is that the IQ test measures an innate ability, which is relatively unaffected by experience. An innate ability, which is relatively unaffected by experience. Let's see what they're trying to say with this. In this view, the child's level of intelligence is set at birth, and later experiences have relatively little effect on the IQ. This view is incorrect. The level of IQ is not determined at birth, and it can fluctuate and change. See, games. That's what I figured what they were saying, but I just want to get the context of that myth that he was stating, and which is, I mean, it's not even surprising, but it's just wow, the technology that the dominant society tries to utilize to keep us in a slumber is just once you're able to, lift the veil and you're like, wow. I mean, I kind of knew already that something wasn't right, but the fact that they're just doing it blatantly like this is outlandish. All right, we must terminate our discussion of the general nature of IQ tests at this point due to the fact that such a discussion will go beyond the intended scope of this work. For those interested in what factors affect the capacity to do well in intelligence tests, we shall address the three of those factors: race, class, and adaptational demands for the duration of the chapter. The different responses of classes and ethnic groups to IQ tests. Generally, as a group, lower class children of any ethnic extraction score lower on IQ and other standardized tests than do higher class children, and black children as a group score lower on those tests than do white children. And keep in mind, again, this is an older book. We have to do the updated studies to see how it applies today. But we're just going to use the generalization because the world is pretty much, society is pretty much operated from generalizations for the most part anyway. There's always going to be exceptions to the rule. Yeah, majority of people is going to go with the rule for their place of measurement or observation. Terman and Merrill in Classic Studies of Intelligence found a 22-point difference between the mean score of white children between the ages of 2.5 and 5.5, belonging to the lowest and highest socioeconomic groups. The difference was in favor of the highest income group. McNeamer found that between the ages of 2 and 5.5, the score for children of professional parents, doctors, lawyers, etc., was 114.8 compared to 93.8 for children of day laborers, a difference of 21 points. I mean, it's not too far off. Day laborers, I mean, the fact that most of their days is focused on just strictly laboring. When they're done laboring, get back, get some rest, and get ready to get back to laboring. So, and you have doctors or lawyers who tend to have a little bit more, of course, after a certain amount of time of doing the practice, and you become a top doctor or lawyer or whatever in this scenario, then essentially you free up some of your time. You might just be on call, or with at a so-called lawyer, $5,000 retainer just to get people to walk with you in the court and things like that. And we know all the BS behind that. All right, where we got a 30-point difference between the advantaged and disadvantaged children between the ages of 4 and 6 was found by Mumbauer and Miller. On the average, as indicated in the table below, black score lower at every class level than white on IQ tests. Race and class differences in IQ scores. All right. So they have so it's saying so-called white people scores are 97.24. And of course they have so-called black, or they got the Negro here, 91.24 mean IQ. That's the first test. Second one, 105.59 to 94.87. Third one, 114.92 to 102.57. All right, so we got the socioeconomic statuses, and those tests are the lowest of the highest tiers that they're utilizing. All right. When one correlates the average scores attained on IQ tests by whites and blacks, one finds an overall 12 to 15-point difference in favor of the whites. The difference between these two ethnic groups on IQ test performance has motivated professional psychologists and laypersons to offer various explanations for their occurrence. However, we should note again, as was first noted in Chapter 2, the ethnic and social class differences in measure and IQ are usually not apparent until around age 3 and after, the exact time being not yet fully established. Bailey, who we mentioned in Chapter 2, in an extensive and carefully controlled study of child intelligence, found that significant social class differences in IQ clearly emerged between the ages of 2.5 and 5.5. Golden et al., in a longitudinal study of social class differences in intellectual development among preschool black children, found no differences in IQ at ages 18 and 24 months between children of the highest and lowest socioeconomic classes. But at age 3, the difference was 19 points. Not unexpectedly, the middle-class black children attained the highest scores. The black children from poor but intact and stable families attained the next highest scores. The lower scores of all were attained by, the black children from fatherless welfare families. Thus, in terms of social class and ethnic origin, measured differences in IQ are usually not found prior to ages 1.5 to 3 years old. And it is between ages 3 to 4 that differences become apparent, i.e. by kindergarten age. Socially disadvantaged children as a group will score lower on the test of general intelligence, language, fine motor development, and most other cognitive tests. As we noted in Chapter 2, the differences in measured IQ between black and white children occurs at the age when race awareness, social, cultural, linguistic factors begin to influence the child's further intellectual personality development. Thus, as Ginsburg said, as black children grow older, the average IQ decreases. What? Sticky and Myers made a comparative cross-race class study of 4-year-olds from black and white, middle and lower class groups, and noted how these groups differed on 7 factors, including IQ tests. The largest difference between the black and white children was in the area of verbal comprehension. White middle class children scored highest, the black middle class and white lower class next, and the black lower class lowest. No differences were found in the area of ideational fluency, ideational fluency, and the free use of language. Okay, so they're saying, yeah, there's no correct way to measure that. They say the black children grow older, the average IQ decreases. That's just some blanket statement. That's yeah. And because Ginsburg said it, people are going wrong with it. But yeah, it's just, how do you even measure something like that? They're talking about 1.5 to 4 years old. What are you talking about as a child, bro? Older, like, what are you looking at? just to you got to create some type of institution so they can, you know, run wild with their trickery. That's just insane. But yeah, the comparative cross race class study of 4-year-olds from black and white, middle and lower class groups, and noted how these groups differ on 7 factors, including the IQ test. So we went to those 7 factors. So they're saying verbal comprehension. Now, like, we get it as far as society version or the status quo of what it means to be coherent or speak properly and things like that. But the verbal comprehension would be just based on the ability to speak. I mean, it just seems like the test is kind of skewed. Because the idea of what it is to have verbal comprehension is clearly not from a universal perspective. All right, so then the white middle class children scored highest, the black middle class and the white lower class next, and the black lower class lowest. All right. So there's, said the verbal comprehension, no differences in ideational fluency and the free use of language. The verbal comprehensive difference between the two groups as a whole seemed to center around the efficient use of standard English. How do you see? Not the lack of ideational ability. We should add that the white group was not superior in all of the areas tested. Despite the opportunities, the difference of environment, still not too far behind. That's wild. Let us enter an important note of caution here. Not all lower class or black children score lower on IQ tests. There are many black and or lower class children, as high as 40% in one study, whose scores are high as or higher than white and upper class children. The scores we have been discussing are average group scores and must be carefully interpreted. Intelligence as a function of environmental adaptation. Earlier in this study, we quoted from the Ginsberg listing of 4 myths concerning IQ tests. Of particular interest to us here in this fourth statement of that series the fourth myth is that the IQ test measures innate ability, which is relatively unaffected by experience. There's disbelief in the genetic and social immutability of intelligence, in spite of the ample evidence that proves such a belief untenable, has caused great difficulties in psychological thinking and which has brought on brutally detrimental social consequences. Exactly. This view of a rigidified, structured, constant, totally genetically determined intelligence works against the concept of evolution and the evidence of man's incredible ability to adapt to all types of circumstances and environments. Man's behavior takes place within the various psychological, sociological, and geophysical contexts, and his behavior reflects his interactions with those contexts. So man's behavior takes place within various psychological, sociological, and geophysical contexts. His behavior reflects his interactions with those contexts. Okay. And I can agree with that. His behavior only makes sense when determined in terms of his interactions with a particular set of psychosocial and geophysical circumstances. This behavior includes intelligence as well as any other you would care to name. Intelligence not defined by or rooted in a particular set of psychosocial, geophysical circumstances, like all other forms of behavior, makes no sense. The overall characteristic of man's interaction with a particular psychosocial, geophysical environment is reciprocal nature, i.e., the environment influences him, he adapts to its influence, and he influences the environment and adapts to his influence. In order for this to happen, particularly in order for man to adapt appropriately to the many environmental circumstances which may confront him, it must not be behaviorally rigidified, structured, inflexible, and immutable. His behavior must not be fixed or fixated. This includes behavior called intelligence, fixed or unchanging. Intelligence is maladaptive in an unfixed and changing world. Intelligent behavior, like all behavior, in order to be adaptive, must be malleable, i.e., capable of being molded according to varying environmental demands, and as such as it is but a reflection of the environmental molding it has endured. Yeah, and we see the proof of that when we say people have street smarts. That means that your behavior is malleable. Depending on the environment you're in, you know how to form, adapt, either contract, extract. You know how to do all these forms of being unscrupulous, as the art of war says it. Sun Tzu, remain formless or unscrupulous. And that's pretty much what intelligence is. And it's like, because of our inability to see in the dimension now, like, and some might be able to actually see and working on it, awakening in different points in time and things like that. But generally speaking, again, of course, the inability to see the things around you and see who you truly are kind of limits us to knowing that we are intelligence. All that we are is consciousness. Clearly, the saying goes, spiritual beings having a human experience, not human beings having a spiritual experience. So just essentially eternal beings. So the only way we'd be fixed or have a fixed mindset is due to the acceptance of the programming. All right. So let us look for the moment at verbal behavior, language, if you will, the principal means by which intelligence is revealed and measured. The flexibility and adaptability of language behavior is obvious to even the most casual observer. He sees there is no fixed, constant, or immutable language behavior, unaffected or unreflective of psychosocial, geophysical circumstance. An individual or group innately capable of learning only one language of a fixed range of vocabulary would be highly maladaptive if they moved about in the world of many languages. In a world that was in flux, it was provided many new experiences which needed assimilating, interpreting, classifying, and transmitted to posterity. Thus, man is born with capacity for language behavior, not a language. Again, the capacity for language behavior. I mean, meaning it's not a language we can't learn. Not a language. Yes, culturally speaking, we have a dialect that we share each, nation of individuals or nation of people has a language or a dialect that is usually adjacent to their culture. Still and yet, even with that society and how it once was, the capability to be able to learn more language other than that, the culturally or what you pretty much were speaking since you were a newborn, that capability is still there. So that's what's beautiful about being, man. As we know, man is mind. Um, Thus, man is born with the capacity for language behavior, not a language. And this capacity is filled with the linguistic contents of a particular environmental surround into which he happens to be immersed. All men, as far as we know, are equally endowed with the capacity to develop and use language appropriate to their particular circumstances. And as their circumstances change, so do their language. Equally endowed with the capacity to develop and use language, men develop and use differing linguistic styles befitting the demands of their particular environment. Thus, linguistic style, whether written, spoken, or otherwise, demonstrates its adaptive qualities, whenever it is expressed. It does not express the limits of linguistic capacity, only the means by which the capacity is expressed. Therefore, a particular language is neither superior or inferior to another. Italian is neither superior or inferior to English. The language of commerce is neither superior or inferior to that of science. They are different linguistic adaptations to different lifestyles which make different demands on a common linguistic capacity. Mm, I mean, it's not from an egoic sense, but if there's a language that pre-exists before a certain language, then that language that already existed was pretty much the superior language. That's just based off patterns or chronological aging or information. It's not to be egoic about it. Um, but for the most part, the point is being made to explore other language. Don't be so fixed. Um, no, I believe that's the point that was being made. So similarly, we will venture to say that all men are endowed with capacity for intelligent behavior and that develop and use intelligence appropriate to their particular circumstances. And as their circumstances change, so does their intelligence. Intelligence is as much, if not more, so an adaptive process as its language, and as with language, is deeply embedded in individuals or group psychosocial, geophysical experiences, and also, as with language, reflective of their attempts to meet a set of cultural roots, soon dies and has little meaning. The same is true of intelligence. As with language, intelligence, however, is expressed, does not express the limits of intellectual capacity, only the means by which capacity is expressed. Consequently, the lower class individual is not necessarily less intelligent than his middle class counterpart, but his cognitive style, the means by which he expresses his intelligence, which reflects his adaptation to his lower class status, is different. This difference may handicap him in a middle class dominated world that sees his adaptive cognitive style or traits as superior. A similar situation exists when an individual's language or linguistic style differs radically from the language of those around him. We have cited studies in Chapter 2, and in this chapter, we indicate with certainty that there are no significant differences in the IQ tests of black and white children before age 3, implying that these two groups have the equal intellectual capacity. Yeah, because you're not messing with them. That's why. Develop all these scenarios and tests and things like that you already have answers to say, well, if they're close to my answer or close to my outlook, then they're going to be in this tier. I mean, which is not objective. So as with language, intelligence, however it's expressed, does not express the limits of intellectual capacity, only means by which capacity expressed. Consequently, the lower class individual is not necessarily less intelligent than his middle class counterpart, but his cognitive style, that means by which he expresses his intelligence, which reflects his adaptation to his lower class status, is different. This difference may handicap him in a middle class dominated world that sees his adaptive cognitive style or trait as superior. A similar situation exists when an individual's language or linguistic style differs radically from the language of those around them. We have cited studies in Chapter 2 and in this chapter which indicate with certainty that there are no significant differences in the test IQ of black and white children before age 3, implying that these two groups have an equal intellectual capacity. As we have repeatedly pointed out, the difference that develops after age 3 is due to the difference in the demands placed on their intellectual capacities by their different psychosocial, geophysical environments. Further evidence of this will be shown presently. Thus, intelligence is an adaptive dimension of individuals' personality, and measured intelligence reflects more the circumstances to which the individual has adapted than his innate capacity for intelligent behavior. Piaget, the foremost student of intellectual development, places adaptation at the very center of his cognitive developmental theory of the theory. He posits that human intellectual growth and development springs from and is shaped by two innately basic tendencies: organization, the tendency or predisposition to integrate. Look how it's already starting off. Because we're not talking about the scientific way of integrating. We're talking about at least what society demonstrates is the social context of integrating, which is not always beneficial for the ones that's integrating into someone else's society, or someone else's version of what a society is, not someone else's society. Yeah. And if the version is dominant enough, then it can influence an entire populace to where it might seem like, yeah, okay, these people run this thing. But it's definitely not the case, again, because we always have the ability to overcome, no matter what. All right, so he said organization, the tendency or predisposition to integrate, coordinate, and combine geophysical structures and psychosocial experiences and perceptions into more complex and coherent systems and adaptation. The tendency or predisposition to adjust constantly to the environment. I'm sorry, consonantly to the environment. Adaptation involves two related processes which interact to transform the individual's experience into knowledge and cognitive schemes. Assimilation, of course, the tendency or predisposition to take in or incorporate new objectives or experiences or concepts to an already existing cognitive system or to form new systems from the old. And accommodation, the tendency to predisposition to adjust the environmental demands to or modify one's concept of the world in response to things as a result of new experiences. Yeah, it's definitely not these concepts are definitely not for a universal utopia or utopia. So let's see what Piaget talked about more. For Piaget, the intellectual processes seek to maintain a balance with their environmental surround through the process of equilibration, the process by which an individual is stimulated to bring harmony and stability into his perception of things and reduce inconsistencies and dissonance created by the environmental changes and demands. One can readily see for the Piaget intelligent behavior is a result of adaptive interaction between assimilation and accommodation. That adaptation is the very core of intelligent behavior. So long as you can adapt and assimilate, integrate, assimilate, adapt, and you become a highly intelligent individual. Now, I can see how that can be beneficial and can exude some character. But like when you doing it into something that you don't even that you pretty much coerce into, then it should be a completely different test. Like how can you use factors in an IQ test that don't even give you an inkling to actually care, enough about preparing yourself for a test. Like you got people in downtrodden situations, and the only thing that these testers are thinking about is them measuring up to some theory that they have as opposed to figuring out how to change the environment. That's how you know it's just, it's all a game. It's just wild. So it has been assumed that since identical twins come from the same egg and share the same set of genes, what differences they exhibit in intellectual functioning must be principally the result of environmental influences. One report showing that 19 identical twins who were separated at ages ranges from 6 years and reared apart demonstrated IQ differences as large as from 10 to 24 points. The average point spread 8.2, which would have been larger if the age range was not so broad and if the homes in which the twins were raised were more dissimilar in socioeconomic background. But we shall see later that earlier a child is adopted into a new environment, the more influence that environment will have on its intelligence or intellectual functioning. That's obviously true. Yeah. Influence, but again, it's not. Influence is not a destination. All right. A dramatic study which demonstrates the substantial effects of adaptation to a particular environment and the effects of that environment on intellectual functioning was done by Skills We will quote from Hetherington's and Park's description of that study. In the late 1930s, Skills set out to determine whether the debilitating impact of early institutionalization could be overcome by exposure to a more enriched environment. Two groups of children were involved in this investigation due to crowding. One group of children was transferred from the orphanage to a mental retardation institution. Children in the comparison group remained in the orphanage. The institution for the mentally retarded to which the subjects of this study were transferred could easily be described as enriched in comparison to the orphanage. It was not simply a more varied and stimulating environment, but one that provided abundant opportunities for social and emotional development as well. The 13 children who were sent to this setting at an average age of 19 months of age were considered mentally retarded, with an average IQ of 64.3. The 12 children in the control group who stayed in the orphanage were close to the normal in terms of intelligence, with the means of IQ of 86.7. To assess the impact of living under these contrasting conditions, the children's intellectual status was reassessed about 1.5 years after the transfer had taken place. Experimental subjects showed a marked increase in mental growth, with the average gain being a dramatic 28.5 IQ points. These mental retardates now had an orphanage of 91. It had an average IQ of 91.8. The losses of the children who stayed in the orphanage were just as spectacular. The average loss was 26.2 IQ points, resulting in a mean IQ of 60.5 for the control group. The two groups have reversed position over a 2-year period. Skills was interested in determining whether the gains achieved by the experimental subject would last. His first follow-up study was conducted 2.5 years after the termination of the initial study. Of the original 13 children, 11 were adopted, while 2 remained institutionalized until adulthood. The adopted children remained their intellectual status. The mean IQ for these children was 101.4, but the institutionalized children dropped in IQ. The unfortunates in the control group, of course, remained wards of the state, and in spite of slight gains, were still classified as mentally retarded. The mean IQ for this group was 66.1. Yeah. Influence. And it's wow. This kind of correlates with I was watching a movie with the family, and what was it? Bad Guardian. And the main character, her father, was pretty much admitted into a nursing home, and because the way he was found out about, or even was known about, because he slipped and fell, hit his head, had a concussion, and then found himself in a nursing home after going to the hospital, because they deemed him to be incapable of taking care of himself, you know, etc. Everything they label you with to kind of try to get you involved in their system. And you had someone who would become played by the character, Lala Anthony. Someone would be the guardian, take the guardianship over the elderly parent, because the children either didn't set up anything for them to be protected by them, disregarded the elderly parents, or just didn't have enough funds to take care of them. So it was kind of dependent on them being able to live alone and make it on their own. But the dad was like in his 80s. So the main characters try to go to the court to pretty much get him released from custody of the guardian that got the custody. Because they pretty much had the business, and their business was to pretty much take over people's estate. That's what it was showing. Because unfortunately, people are unaware of how to control their estate. So they're pretty much taking over it, making them sell all their things so they can cover the costs of being in a nursing home, and then just pretty much profiting off, the people's ignorance. But yeah, I thought it was, you know, relatable to what we're reading here, because once he finally got into the facility, that's when his health declined. So we're talking about the influence of environment. You can utilize that as an IQ test, and I'm sure you receive the same results. I think in society, we tend to make things, you know, too surface level for a belt of superiority, pretty much. That's what it all boils down to. Constantly comparing each other, and ways that somewhat matter. I mean, you can see the results of, I guess, maybe people that possibly have a lower IQ. But again, every host, or every being is pretty much different. So it's kind of hard to. It's just kind of hard to measure. I mean, we find a way to measure it, but again, these tests is just have to take them with a grain of salt until we can actually like be a society again to where higher learning is the main priority. Like how people chase the bag and things like that. Yeah, we got to have the funds to take care of our needs and things like that. But even in ancient Kemet, they had these mystery schools, which is you know the higher learning, and then you go about continuing to transform, perfect, and just evolve. But what do you expect when we have um, been hijacked and under a threat of duress, forced to participate in capitalism? And it's not. I mean, it's not that bad, honestly. When you really slow down a little bit and stop thinking that everything is just what it is, and you gotta live, you gotta have a life. Figure out how to either get out of the system, get away from it, or figure out how to utilize it to your advantage. But yeah, let's see. All right, let's go ahead. Let's get back to it. All right. The implication of this study is clear. The deleterious effects of early environmental restriction can be effectively reversed. Similarly, these findings suggest that continued deprivation has obviously harmful effects. In general, prediction of the adult status is affected by all periods of life and later age points in childhood, adolescence, or adulthood can only be understood by a close examination of the intervening environmental factors that are present in any developmental period. In short, it's not just early experience, but experience at all age points that needs to be continually considered in attempting to understand the child's development. You know what? We'll just do a part 2 of this, a book session number 6. Let me stop here for now. We don't have too much longer. So we'll go ahead and stop here for now. This is a solid read. Again, like I addressed when I first started reading this. We know about the connotative linguistics behind it. I was just taking it for what the literature is. Again, kind of just dissecting this and seeing how it applies today and how accurate it is as far as your children upbringing. Because developing not just healthy but beneficial behavior is how you raise children that end up being healed adults. All right, so with that being said, until next time, Islam, peace and love, and we out of here.